What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your boy, Jack Slack. Back from my holiday. Sorry, I've been away for a little while. The wife and I thought, why don't we escape for a few days? So we went off to beautiful tropical waters, lovely and blue, lots of coral and shit swimming in the coral, which I enjoyed, though I am awful at snorkeling. And then the day that I got there, I got stomach flu, so that was good. She enjoyed that. But otherwise had a fantastic time. Back now, got lots of work to do, got rewrites to do on Notorious. We're putting in the Mayweather-McGregor stuff and the stripping but not stripping of the title stuff. Basically just an excuse to talk about Floyd Mayweather in a book about Conor McGregor. But you should definitely buy the rewrite once I've done it. I missed quite a bit, didn't I? I've been trying to get through the Jon Jones hearing this morning because I wanted to be up to date and current with all of that, but it was an hour and a half, and I just can't stand the dude, to be honest. He is the least sincere and most skeevy person in this sport, with the exception of Malkikawa and maybe Ali, what's his name? Ali Scumbag. But it was gold. I mean, he was sat there going, I would never confess to having taken drugs. You're like, John, that's not the point. And then he kept bringing up the polygraph test, which no one respects, but then you saw the caliber of idiot that he's stood in front of, and you thought, oh, maybe they do. That black guy forgot his hearing aid, and then said, oh, it's a good thing I didn't hear any of that because I don't have my hearing aid with me. Great start to proceedings. And then he proceeded to talk about Stephen A. Smith in gushing terms, completely unrelated to everything, several times for the next hour. It was absolutely bizarre. Came out that Jon Jones didn't remember doing things or had signed things but hadn't actually signed them himself and had his management do it. And then they called him out on this and were like, you should probably change your management. And he goes, yeah, haha, Malky. Then just goes back to normal. Absolutely fucking bizarre. His defense was basically his lawyer cajoling some doctor to read a page off bodybuilding.com. Absolutely bizarre. Like, you know, we laughed about how ridiculous Joe Rogan's theory about cocaine cut with creatine, cut with, what is this 1960 steroid, terbinol, because you have to be fucking terrible to get caught with it. No, that's the hilarious thing about this whole thing. They changed the testing protocol, or they found some new way of detecting it further out, and suddenly he gets caught for it, which basically means that he's been doing it the entire time, or until, at least recently. Yeah, I mean, nobody actually believes this, do they? Like, the only people who are pretending to believe it are the people who just want Jon Jones to come back anyway and don't really care about the drug stuff. And, that's a fine camp to be in. I think that USADA, at least, has done more damage to the UFC's product than it has helped people. Because if you're not catching enough people, everyone thinks that they're just getting away with it anyway. And if you are catching people, it just sort of destroys what they did before, like Anderson Silva and Jon Jones. The two of the best ever are now also two of the most caught ever, which is fucking embarrassing. Plus, obviously, after USADA came in, massive turn-up in the cancellations of events or cancellation of fights and dropouts due to injury, because a lot of people were using it to get through that stuff. I say it, generically drugs. A lot of people were using performance-enhancing drugs to increase their recovery when they were injured. Or improve their recovery, whatever the correct term is. But the whole thing's so fucking shady because Jeff Nowitzki is on Joe Rogan's podcast basically saying, oh, actually, I don't really work for USADA. What I do is I work for the UFC and I lie to USADA on behalf of MMA fighters who've been caught. Just so stupid, the whole thing. Obviously, Jon Jones, I mean, he's either the most unlucky person in the world or he's using performance-enhancing drugs. Like, there's not really any middle ground there. The most hilarious part is people who are like drug-free bodybuilders and so on like that. And if you know anything about like bodybuilding, even the drug-free guys are still trying to use drugs, a lot of them. But they're coming out of the woodwork and going, no, like if you're worried about supplements, you stop taking supplements, or you more carefully vet your supplements. Just so stupid. Beyond all stupidness. Ballsy move by Yoel Romero, though, suing the company that he's blaming for his tainted supplements. Anyway, what else happened while I was away? Oh, Rockhold versus Ramiro. I don't know if we ever touched on that. I wrote an article. Oh, no, I wrote an article in the aftermath, but that was before we all decided that Yoel Romero was a 52 blocks master because he does the crossguard the wrong way around, which has zero benefits. The whole idea is that your lead hand goes over the top, your rear hand goes over the top, your lead hand goes below, so that you can then turn back to a bladed stance and be in a shoulder roll, and then turn forward again and be in the lock, and your left hand's lower so you can swing it up for the left hook or dig it to the body. Doing it the wrong way around has zero benefits. The only people who do it that way are weird black dudes on basketball courts going, yeah, this is the 52. Wait a minute while I come up with some other techniques for the 52, because there is only the skull and crossbones guard. We'll talk about the 50. Actually, should we talk about the 52 now? I got a question about the 52 this week, being like, what is the 52? 52 blocks is a mythical black prison martial art. And to be honest, it's kind of racist that whenever a black fighter does anything with his elbows in MMA, people immediately go, well, he knows the 52. It's these people who are trying to sell you on the 52 that are always doing it. Zab Judah did some handy stuff against... not handy as in useful, but actually did stop Floyd Mayweather from beating him up when he was beating him up. But he did a little bit of elbow stuff, and Floyd Mayweather sort of stood back so that he wouldn't walk onto an elbow. And it went on for about 5 seconds, and then that became Zab Judah knows the 52, because he's black and from the streets. Yoel Romero, obviously never been to an American prison, is a Cuban exile, Cuban escapee? What are you if you leave and then you can't go back? I think that's an exile. Defector? That's a little bit harsh. But he's a Cuban. He's not been to an American prison. He's had no contact with anyone who's going to teach him the 52. The best part about the whole 52 blocks thing is that it was supposedly founded, I believe in like the 70s, but by this psychotic black convict called Mother Dear. No other name. No one knows who he was. No one can prove he existed. But apparently to learn the 52, you had to be 1, black, 2, bad enough, 3, his lover. So you're like, what's going on? This is a system where you have to be sodomized by the dude before he trusts you with any of the knowledge. And the knowledge is bad versions of what many successful black and white boxers already did. Just absolutely bizarre. So if you ever hear anyone talk about 52 blocks, just laugh in their face. What's the worst that they can do? They can do some skull and crossbones blocks at you. What else happened? Jeremy Stephens versus Josh Emmett. Yeah, that was good. I instantly, on holiday, I checked my phone and I got all this. Well, Jack, not looking so much like an overrated knockout artist now, is he? I was like, yeah, I was absolutely wrong to talk about how inconsistent he was as a knockout artist. This being his only back-to-back finish in the second most fights in the UFC ever. I mean, I really enjoyed his last two, actually, and I do see improvements in Jeremy Stephens, but I also didn't see anything in this fight that would have won him that Moicano fight. Also, I'm getting well into Moicano because I watched his Brian Ortega fight for the Ortega Edgar piece that I wrote this week. But yeah, I'm still seeing a lot of lumbering from Jeremy Stephens. Cruz was unbearable on commentary, but then he often is. There's a lot of argument over illegal action in this fight and so on, but I thought Emmett was moving well, but he did sort of get, it was him doing darts and going in and out that got him clipped on the way out. Guys like Moicano fought very clearly on the outside. Guys like Edgar went in and out very smoothly, stuck to takedowns, did a good job generally of keeping himself safe, but did get hurt in that fight. Jeremy Stephens does catch people. He's just very inconsistent at finishing people, and also has a lot of trouble if they're moving and they don't want to stand and fight with him. I called him the perfect gatekeeper, and that's people are going to get butthurt about that, but you can be a top 15, top 10 fighter and still be a gatekeeper if you are very clearly a bar that the elite have to get over, and that the guys who aren't either smart enough or gifted enough, or both really, can't get by. That's being a gatekeeper. You're keeping the gate on the top 10, the top 5. And that's consistently what you find with Jeremy Stephens. The best guys in the world recognize that they have to fight differently against him. And the ones who don't realise that get knocked out or get beaten up on en route to a decision. Reminds me a little bit of Roy Nelson before everyone was clear that he doesn't have a gas tank at all. So really, you only need to not get hit for the first round, and then he'll just wheeze. Oh, and Roy Nelson fought. He fought Matt Mitrione. Did not give a shit about that fight, so I didn't watch it. I asked people this week when I got back, was like, what do I need to catch up on? Was the Bellator any good? And people were like, there was a Bellator? I watched Yamauchi versus Michael Chen. No, that was the one before, wasn't it? Bugger me. Gets complicated. Other news. John Fitch to Bellator. I really like that piece of news. John Fitch sort of fell off the map when he left the UFC. You know, he went to World Series of Fighting. And I think a lot of people wrote him off because as soon as he left the UFC, he had a fight with Josh Berkman. Jesus Christ, was that 2013? Had a fight with Josh Berkman, got guillotined, won a couple, and then got knee-barred by Husmar Palhares. But he then went on, like a 4-fight winning streak over Yushin Okami and Jake Shields in there. So good guys. And, to get him in Bellator really strengthens up their welterweight division. I mean, that division is getting so good. If they could open the purse strings and get Askren back now that he's officially retired, I'm hoping it's because the ONE FC contract's ended. He was talking about how he would come to the UFC, but there are enough good welterweights in Bellator now that Askren would be well worth having on board. I mean, if they can offer him anything similar in the money to ONE FC, or... I mean, obviously he wants to go to the UFC to, fight the best, I imagine, but I'm sure you could persuade him with slightly more money and the prospect of fighting the other best guys in the world, because the state of the Bellator division now is so much better than when Ben Askren was originally there. But yeah, they're quietly assembling a great welterweight division. More and more excited for that every time, and good on you, Bellator. But also shame on you for Roy Nelson, Matt Mitrione too. And in related Bellator news, Viacom said that they're getting a streaming service later this year. Unfortunately, I was excited when I saw this, and I was like, oh my god, am I actually going to be able to watch Bellators live? No, it seems like they're just going to have 1,000 hours of Cops, or whatever it is that Viacom / Paramount Network now do. Oh, and the other piece of news was that WWE are scooping in to try and take the slot on Fox that the UFC had. The whole state of the UFC at the moment is something that we should probably talk about at great length. I was going to write an open letter to Dana White called Dear Dana while I was on holiday, and then my wife was like, no, you're not allowed to do any work out here, so that didn't happen. But I thought that was a good idea for either a series or a one-off, just like a list of things. Please do this with the UFC. But I think, with the UFC generally going forwards, you're going to have to see some kind of change, because you've either got to be more present on television, because at the moment it feels very much like the television portion of the UFC is the second best, and then the A grade stuff is on the pay-per-views. But I say that, but the most 221 and 222, 220 and 222, whichever ones were the recent ones are shit, and the upcoming one is shit too. But I feel like if you really want to get people into this, you've got to try and do it more like an actual league and have it on TV each week. There's enough fighters that you can have them fighting fairly. You can have fights on fairly often. You might have to cut down the number of fights on the card, or at least on the televised portion, and have a load of dark matches or something like that, or have people tune in on Fight Pass for the prelims. But I think you either got to go all on TV or really cut back on the amount of pay-per-views, because one a month is just not doing it. The buy rates are in the toilet, and the events keep turning out shit. Whereas if you do a quarterly pay-per-view, treat it like the big ones that WWE does rather than the shit ones in between, I think you could probably still make it fiscally viable. I was thinking about this morning, Conor McGregor, his next fight is almost guaranteed to do 1 million at least on pay-per-view. But what if they could do that? What if they could sell that to Fox? What if Conor McGregor, his big fight, was on Fox? You could do some serious money in the advertising in between fights on that. And you would also have a huge spectacle that everyone saw. Pump up your numbers, make up for failing TV ratings on slower weeks. But But also what I feel like they've done is that they haven't really used the TV to build the pay-per-views very well. Like, I think, I've always said this, but I've always thought it would have been worth the hit to them financially to get someone like Nate Diaz to fight Tony Ferguson or whoever. I mean, we're talking like a year ago now, but someone like that to fight on TV where you can go, the guy who wins here is the next for McGregor. You know, even if Conor McGregor's never going back to TV, put his next challenger on TV, make a huge deal of it, and hope that people care. Because I think if people had seen, say, that Kevin Lee-Tony Ferguson fight, if that had been on TV, I think people would have fucking loved that. And you'd have something to talk about. You'd have people talking about, well, this guy will never beat McGregor, or this guy will beat McGregor, and this, that, and the other. But you put that behind a paywall, so nobody knows much about him unless they watched him previously or paid to watch it. Who knows? So that's our State of the Union, or State of the UFC, or State of MMA discussion. Let's do some questions, and then we'll have a good talk about the fights going on this weekend. Hey Jack, are we overestimating Khabib's overall striking ability? In one round against Barboza, he was heavy with the leg kicks and got taken down at will, I assume he being Barboza. However, in 2 and 3, when a barely cognizant Barboza decided to abandon low kicks and box, Khabib's wrestling seemed to be much less effective, with Barboza shrugging off multiple takedown attempts. Considering this, is Khabib really Conor's nightmare? If Conor sticks to his hands, Khabib seems susceptible to running onto the left hand, and by running, literally running, as he was chasing Barboza around thoughtlessly. Also, is Conor's takedown defense that bad? Diaz took him down easily while gassed, and in the Mendez fight he had a knee injury, torn ACL possibly, and showed decent takedowns and scrambling ability in past fights. See the Holloway. Loving the podcast from Luke. Yeah, I mean, this is the real enticement about the fight. And this is kind of why Tony Ferguson's thunder is getting stolen so much. You've got such a clash of styles in McGregor versus Nurmagomedov. Nurmagomedov is very sloppy on the feet. I'll just say it. You know, he wings in those leaping left uppercuts, often in a way that it looks like he's lucky he misses, because his shoulder looks like it could tear apart if he lands that way. And the jogging after Barboza, and some people are like, well, he was putting on a show, but he also, like, he was chasing on a line. He wasn't stepping across and cutting him off. And Barboza, when he was punching and pivoting, he did well, but he only did that for like 30 seconds in either of the rounds. The thing about ringcraft generally is that you don't get to really know how good someone's ringcraft is until you see them against someone who's doing the right things against it. I was saying this before the Cyborg fight, people were like, well, she cuts the ring brilliantly. And I was like, who are you telling me she cut the ring brilliant against? You know, she struggled to keep up with Tonya Evinger at certain points. And she looked really good in the Holm fight, consistently making exchanges happen on her terms. And that, to me, is like, okay, now I can say, well, look how good that offensive ringcraft was. If you're putting forward her performances against, like, jumped up 1-2-5ers and things like that, you're not. It's relative to who they fight. It was the same with Ronda Rousey. People were like, Jack, how is Holly Holm going to avoid her when Ronda Rousey has just run everyone else on the fence? Do you not think that other people wanted to circle out? And I'm like, well, yeah, but they weren't very good at it. And then obviously when she fought Holly Holm, she couldn't keep up at all. But then even when Holm was doing everything right, she still had to be able to defend herself in the clinch, because they came twice on Rousey's terms. I think what's quite interesting is that Conor McGregor is sort of a hybrid fighter, in that he goes forward aggressively and attacks people so that they come back at him, and then he counter strikes. That was one of the weird things about the Mayweather fight, was that he was put into this outfighter position where he was supposed to circle away and sidestep and throwing out these combinations, and it looked weird. It looked like Conor McGregor doing an impression of someone else. And it's the same thing he had trouble with against Diaz. It's a lot easier to pick people off if they're making a lunge at you after you've slapped them about a bit than it is to go backwards and box. Certainly, if that's your bread and butter, it's a lot easier. I mean, if Khabib Nurmagomedov comes in and just walks forward swinging clumsily, that's pretty much arrogance on the part of him or his coaches. You have seen in 2 different fights now, in 2 different sports even, that Conor McGregor's magic punching power isn't there when he isn't offered that counter. He's not nearly as effective if you just put your forearms up and walk at him. You're going to get hit. There's better ways to do it, but simply crowding him and not affording him openings is what makes the difference. If you are lunging after him, a la Aldo or Alvarez, those are the best connections that he can pick off. It's the difference between being in someone's face and running at someone, and that's really interesting to me, like what Khabib can do with that. I hope he's working with tons of people who are trying to counter him on the way in. Obviously, he wrestles with guys like Rockhold, but to be honest, Rockhold wouldn't be a bad choice to work against in this, in sparring for this one. I mean, obviously there's a big size difference, but Khabib is a massive lightweight. The stories coming out of that gym of him walking around like nearly 200 pounds. But, someone like Rockhold is decent enough because they are just looking for that one counter. And if you lunge in, you're going to get caught. It doesn't matter if it's the check right hook or the Conor McGregor backstepping left. You're still opening yourself up if you're overcommitting after them. I still think Gaethje's a fun fight for McGregor, just because he's good at putting his forearms up and walking people down. And low kicking, of course. But then this is the whole thing that I'm quite interested in, like, as much as I do care about McGregor coming back now, I get to the point where I don't. But what I was writing in Notorious was was it Notorious or was I writing it somewhere else? Was basically that he's taken this year off and he's been exclusively boxing. And all right, his sparring partners were not nearly as good as the guys that Floyd Mayweather was bringing in, but he was still working full time on his boxing for a year. No one has been afforded that opportunity in MMA. And then had a boxing lesson with the best boxer of his generation immediately after that. But I think it'd be really interesting because he was trying to show all this weird stuff against Mayweather, and cutting angles and moving offline and being the like flashy outfighter when he was supposed to be in like the power punching role. I think it'd be really interesting to see what he's learned from that if a guy does just keep trying to walk him down. I think he'd much prefer a fight against Khabib than he would against Tony Ferguson, because as weird and goofy as Tony Ferguson is on the feet, he's a lot more threatening there than Khabib Nurmagomedov. And, good on the ground too. So it's interesting. But, we'll get one of them, and I doubt we'll get the other. I doubt we'll get another one out of McGregor at all. But, that's the great thing about taking all this time off. Other folks fighting in the most competitive division in the world will lose. And then you can be like, well, he's got no chance against McGregor then. Cheers, Luke. Oh, I hope that isn't Luke Rockhold. Dear Seafood Grandmaster Slack, I'm a huge fan of your work and I'm very happy that the podcast is doing well and that you are doing the additional episode every week. Yes, I will be getting back to that. This is the this is the Friday episode, and then I'll be doing either a Sunday night or Monday episode, depending on how organised I am watching all the fights. And we'll also be bringing in the star ranking system with no spoilers at the start of the podcast. Now that you're sufficiently buttered, yes I am, I have a rather unusual question for you. I'm a teaching assistant for a world history college class in the States, and later this semester my professor has given me the opportunity to do a lecture on globalization. Being the try-hard blue belt that I am, I wanted to do something on the development of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, tracking its history from Japan to Brazil, to the United States and the rest of the UFC. Oh, and the rise of the UFC. I was like, the UFC? World? Okay. Naturally, I will also include a plug for Notorious. Oh, thank you. To do this, I'd like to put together a video showing students some history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu over the years, perhaps tracking the use of particular techniques in different sports and events. I was wondering if you would recommend some good fights to watch from grappling history. Please help, it's 9 a.m. class, and I just want to stay awake. Your boy, Ben. P.S. I will also plug the podcast. You're very nice, Ben. I think the early history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, well, let's be fair, when we talk about early history, when everyone really learned about it was like 1993, first UFC event. But I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in Brazil with Vale Tudo and Carlson Gracie and all that stuff. And there are huge, very well-researched books available on that called Choke, Choque. And they are a slog, I'm not going to lie. I've done about 1.5 in anticipation of doing a history episode on the early days of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, but I am nowhere near done. Like, the 3rd volume is twice the size of the other 2 volumes. So it's a slog, but, you sound like a smart enough lad, so if you're really pressed, you can get through that. But Choke's quite interesting because it's Choke, the book, rather than the documentary about Rickson Gracie, is interesting because a lot of it sort of debunks the Gracie hype machine. All the stuff about Helio being the 97-pound weakling, and there's photos of him, a strapping young swimmer, competitive with some of the better amateurs in Rio or wherever it was that they were. A lot of it is just, the Gracies telling Porky Pies, and Helio didn't train with them, he just learned by watching them. And you're like, no, that's probably not true either. But yeah, all that stuff from the early days, Carlson Gracie and the Valet Tudo stuff, always really interesting. Footage of I think it's Rickson and Ray Zulu. There's some really nice footage of I think Ray Zulu picking him up above his head and slamming him, and then Rickson working his guard. And then if you're talking about the history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'd probably go with the UFC and then Royce Gracie's return to grappling to take on Valid Ismail, where he was clock choked. And the clock choke was pretty trendy and new sort of stuff at the time. I think, in Jiu-Jitsu at least, I think Mario Sperry caught Royler Gracie with it at one point. Mario Sperry made a real signature of it. But then you got Terere, Trere, who, you can, there's so many good highlights of that guy, and I think BJJ Scout did a highlight on him with a load of guys saying thanks to Terere at the end, and BJJ Scout had to issue a semi-retraction, be like, no, he's not dead, it's just these guys wanted to say thanks to him. But Terere is a really interesting character, and so is Marcelo Garcia, and they had a little rivalry back in the early 2000s. And Terere is the guy you go to for the modern passing game. He was doing back steps and all this really fancy, slick-looking shit. And that, highlight to Terere will make your class ooh and ah, because he was black explosive, but in a jiu-jitsu way. And then Marcelo was obviously just a little tank, and he's revolutionized the guard game. And his passing obviously became world-class as well. I would go with that early sort of period, and the Marcelo's a really good one to trace through because he really comes into the modern age. And then you got the guys like the Mendezes, who are, and the Miaos and so on, who are really the epitome of very modern jiu-jitsu. But then another nice example is someone like Buchecha, who is something like 230, 240 pounds, but he inverts a much smaller man. He's a guy who is naturally a gigantic heavyweight dude, but he has put a ton of effort into being able to do things that much lighter weight class guys do. He could probably get by on just smashing people, but he's put in the effort to learn all sorts of weird inversions and stuff. And if you're a big dude who can invert, you can also do things like the tornado sweeps, which are a great way to just ruin your back if you're a smaller guy. And of course, Roger is always an interesting storyline along with that, because he is just. I've had the privilege of training with Roger a few times at his academy, but he's just the guy knows where everything needs to be all the time. He's like, don't let them put their foot there, and you'll be like, why? And then he'll go, well, because 3 steps down the line that could be a problem. He's a real basic smothering dude, and it's when you say basic, it's you're basic. It seems a bit insulting, but fundamentally sound guy. He famously said people would ask him, how do you deal with the De La Riva or the Lasso or something like that, and he'd go, I don't get put in it. I make sure that I'm always either standing out at range or smashing into half guard or something like that. And of course, the Buchecha-Roger rivalry is a great way to highlight that, because Buchecha and Roger, when they met the first time, we were all like, Jesus, Buchecha's the future. Look what he did to Roger. And then the second time they met, which was last year, Roger did like the most basic sleeve drag you've ever seen and got on his back and choked him. It was incredible. So that would be a nice way to frame it. Like, here's the basic stuff, here's the super advanced stuff, here's how it all developed, but then it goes back to the basic stuff. But no, I'm not going to do your work for you. But then, of course, you got like, it's always nice to put in things like the Metamoris stuff. Josh Barnett as a weird catch wrestler, showing like a different dynamic of grappling where you focus on hurting people and tiring them with the rides. And guys like Eddie Bravo, who had this weird bottom game that, you know, he was only around for a little while as a competitor, and people, for a very long time, people were like, this is bullshit, it wouldn't work. Once he released his books, they were like, yeah, lockdown half game, don't really see that working. And then he came back and did it all over Hoyler Gracie in their rematch at Metamoris, and then guys like Gary Tonnen and, well, even Anthony Bourdain in the New York Open. But like a few of Danaher's guys do a lot of lockdown work. And the BJJ community is weird like that. Like, I was looking for something by Neil Melanson. I was looking for the really old videos he put out on his Triangle series. And there's dudes on forums being like, yeah, well, Melanson's full of shit. You know, he doesn't compete and he just beats up smaller guys and this, that, and the other. And then you hear guys like Michael Chandler be in the breakup of the Black Zillions. He's like, I don't care. I'll just go wherever Neil Melanson is. This guy's such a good coach, and because he doesn't have any like tournament accolades, people are like, yeah, well, bullshit. It's a very strange sport like that. You know, people don't believe something works until it's been really proven, which means that whoever is actually willing to give stuff a go, you know, they get a massive head start on anything they want to try. But you do sort of have to commit to it on blind faith, I suppose. Anyway, I've honked on about that for a little while, but yeah, there's tons of great stuff to look into. I would go like, here's the basic stuff, but here's all the weird stuff, but here's the basic stuff again at the end, and I'd wrap it all up with Roger, because everyone loves Roger. Hello, Senior Slack. Quick and easy one today. What's your current stance on the meaning/importance of championship belts in the UFC? They're really good on posters. That's my entire view on them. I do not give a shit. You know, like, Demetrius Johnson doesn't need a belt for me to be like, I know he's the best in the world. But equally, like, Cyborg's belt, I know she's the best in the world in that division, but I also feel like that belt is just propped up on nothing. You know, she's fighting nobodies. And then there's belts that they just create to, like, quickly sell a fight, like when they gave Holloway the interim belt, or Holloway versus Pettis the interim belt. You know, what the fuck's the point of that? Part 2, are there any good footwork drills you know of and can share? It would be much appreciated due to the fact that the area that I live in could best be described as East Bumfuck, west of absolutely nowhere. So yeah, not many striking gyms can take advantage of. Thank you as always. Love the podcast and the articles from Ian. I mean, footwork drills, you know, move forward and back, move side to side. Practice your side steps, practice your short stutter step side step for in shorter distance. Footwork's great because, like, if you do it, you know, the whole idea of footwork generally is you're either using it to create some openings and angles and things, or you're using it defensively, or you're using it economically, which is what you want to be doing most of the time. As Musashi said, you know, ferrying across, don't get fancy. But if you're doing a shadowboxing session, you know, you can make it a lot more spirited than you need to. You can the guy in your head can just keep running at you, you know, whereas most people get tired. So you can keep working your side steps. You can keep sidestepping out and countering, and you can really up the pace of the session that way. I always like doing shifting work, stance switching work. So you know, sidestepping out to the side and pivoting in behind the opposite leg so that that's now in the lead. I'm a huge proponent of switching stances in motion. I don't believe you should ever really stand still and switch stances. If you watch Holloway versus Swanson, that's a great fight for... Every time Holloway changes stance, he's stepping offline or doing something. If you I can't remember which of Mickey Ward's fights it was, but he had some success, like changing stances occasionally, and he was having trouble with his opponent. So he goes, okay, I'm going to change stances, and he keeps doing it right in front of the opponent. And as soon as he goes, the guy steps in with the right straight. And the same happened with who was that guy who put on a really good fight against Gennady Golovkin? Oh, yeah, it was Danny Jacobs. Yeah, Danny Jacobs did a fantastic job. He was boxing out of both stances, but Golovkin picked up on the fact that he would change stances right in front of him. And, Golovkin... The problem is that a lot of guys, when you change stances on them, they don't catch up. They don't go, okay, shit, now I'm working against a southpaw, or now I'm working against an orthodox, or rather, now I'm working closed guard, now I'm working open guard. And that gives you the advantage for the moment, especially if you hide it in motion. But if you're just waiting on the guy to change stances, if he's orthodox and you're orthodox, and you're waiting for him to change stances, and the moment he does, you're going to throw the right straight down the center, you're going to step in and do it. That gives you the advantage, because you aren't going to step in and throw a right hand lead at someone in an orthodox stance. Their shoulder's in the way. You're going to be too slow to get him. But as soon as he changes, that key punch becomes open. And if you can catch him then, that's the perfect time. And Golovkin, I think he knocked down Jacobs in one of the rounds, and he either hurt him or knocked him down. But whatever it happened, it was because Jacobs switched stances and Golovkin stepped in and threw the right hand deep. And he'd been waiting on him changing. And I believe in the middle of some of the rounds, in between some of the rounds, Jacobs' corner were like, why are you changing? Why are you changing stances? You're boxing him up from orthodox. Stop changing stances. That's a really good fight, actually. It's one that's a little bit jaded with controversy, in the same way that anytime someone puts a good show on against someone who's undefeated, it either has to be a robbery or an arse kicking the other way and everyone else is a moron. But no, Jacobs put on a really good show against Golovkin, and he showed a lot of stuff that could really trouble Golovkin. Right, I've got so many questions to catch up on. We'll do some more on Monday. If you have any questions, send fightsgonebipodcast@gmail.com. I will get to them eventually, I promise. We'll do some catch-up stuff. But in the meantime, let's have a look at some of the fights this weekend. I mean, it's a mixed bag this weekend, but there are a couple that I really like. Kaladov versus Narkun, which is the main event of KSW 42. That is such a good fight. And I wrote something about it this week specifically because I wanted more eyes on it. It's such a good fight. It's kind of flying under the radar for a lot of people, but Kaladov has been the best, the guy that everyone points to as the best middleweight to never make it to the UFC for years. And he went to Elite XC or Show XC or whoever it was. KSW started back in 2007, and I didn't even realize they were that old and had been around that long. But they really built up a following, and they're doing great. But Kaladov was around, then he went to the US, and then he came back to KSW, having fought there in his really early career, and then came back to it again. And then they signed him into a really good deal, and he just fights basically anyone and everyone. So he had Falcao, the guy who got in that gas station fight, got kicked out of the UFC. Was it for the drugs or for being insane? I can't ever remember. I get him mixed up in my head with Thiago Silva. But he fought Falcao. He fought Luke Barnett. Barnett. I'm going to call him Barnett because it's easier. But Luke Barnett was... He'd come out of the UFC on a loss, and he put together 4 wins. Was looking good, looking composed. Always troublesome because he's a big, tall striker. And Kaladov blew him out in 20 seconds. It was incredible. He's got this really interesting kicking game, a massive right hand. Not the best boxer in the world. Often throws himself off balance. He'll send himself stumbling, without the other guy touching him. And he'll do barrel rolls. He does some Tony Ferguson style stuff. And you're watching it going, how have you never lost a fight, lost a decision based on this stuff? His most recent fight, they got their welterweight champion to go up and fight him. He's the middleweight champion, which was it's sort of a super fight, but it's less impressive if the better guy is the heavier guy. So he fights, is it Mankovsky or whoever? And he basically... He builds his offense around the axe kick on a whim. The guy is insane. But then he'll walk him to the fence, and as soon as he circles out, he'll try and wheel kick him or back kick him or something like that. But anytime the other guy comes back or catches him mid-flying knee or something like that, Kaladov will throw himself to the floor and be like, jump in my guard. He's a really weird fighter like that. And he'll just dive after leg locks for no reason. He's a pretty chaotic dude. His nickname's the Cannibal, and he fights like a crazy man. So, but terrific fighter. And what makes this fight so special is that he's going up to light heavyweight. He's not just fighting some light heavyweight. He's fighting the KSW light heavyweight champion, Thomas Narkun. And Narkun is... they're both Polish for a start, which is obviously great for your Polish promotion. But Narkun's really interesting because he's made it to the ADCC European either finals or trials or whatever several times now. But he's a really good grappler, fights well off his back, uses elbows brilliantly off his back. Up kicks a ton, as you would expect from a training partner of Mousasi, but he'll also throw in the odd illegal up kick. Really likes to foul. I noticed that a lot. He grabbed Sokoudjou by the dreads like 8 times in their fight. He finishes the fight holding 2 handfuls of Sokoudjou's dreads and kneeing him in the head along the fence. It's brutal. He headbutts people a lot, and he tries to, upkick people on the ground a lot. He's kind of a dirty fighter, but he is also really interesting. The thing is that his striking just isn't that polished yet, but he's 6'3". He's got 3 inches of height on Khalidov, and while the match is being fought at, I think 198 is the catch weight, that's still like 7 pounds off what he normally weighs. That's probably still enough weight that he'll have on Khalidov. I don't imagine Khalidov buffing up to that weight. I was talking about the ins and outs of this, and I think for the thing about Narkun is that I've never really been impressed with his wrestling. When he's going after takedowns, he's never that special. But I think if he can crowd Khalidov and duck the right hands, because he's pretty good at getting away from punches, he's just not very good at like boxing or counter boxing. I think if he can get in Khalidov's face, he can really like trouble him. Khalidov had this fight against a lad called like Kawagulu or something like that, and he really did badly in that fight. Won a majority decision, which was really questionable. And the guy did it by just getting in his face and hitting him when he was along the fence. His footwork is not great, and his head movement isn't great either. He's just a very strange, powerful fighter. And fortunately, this guy had entered to the Al Qaeda theme song, which he had supplied to them apparently, and he hasn't fought since. They immediately sacked him, and he hasn't fought anywhere else. But yeah, it was a really rough fight on Khalidov, and I think a lot of it was the guy getting in his face, because he'll throw the right hand and then he'll be way off balance. He's not good in combinations, and he often sends himself stumbling with how out of position he gets. And I think that's good for Narkun. If he gets in his face, makes him stumble, if he can expose his back for a second or just to have him tripping over himself, the takedowns have come out a lot easier against guys who are stumbling than they do against guys who are ready for you. And of course, if he can draw the jumping back kick, which Khalidov loves as a counter, or the flying knee, which again Khalidov loves as a counter, if he can draw that, come in behind his raised knee or something like that, and just jam his way in, free clinch or even free takedown if the guy falls over while he's doing it, as Khalidov has a few times. For Khalidov, I'd like to see him, I said in the article, I'd like to see him take a page out of the Machida Boys book. Just dance. Let the guy come to you. Let him shoot sloppy shots. Let him swing missed kicks. And then come back with the right hand when you think he's overcommitting. And I think measuring the fight that way would be more in Khalidov's interest. What's interesting to me is that this might be an opponent who makes Khalidov fight less wildly. If he's smart, he'll fight less wildly. But I think that's really interesting. That's what really has me intrigued by this fight. Khalidov is 37 years old. He's into the twilight of his career now. But I think this might be the most impressive win on his record if he does it. Because this isn't just some 205er. This is the best 205er KSW has. And possibly the best 205er outside of the UFC and Bellator at this point. So yeah, definitely watch that. I mean, I don't really care about many of the other matches going on. They got their featherweight champion defending, I think, or their lightweight champion. But yeah, that's the one to watch. Bellator have Darian Caldwell fighting against Leandro Higo. Don't really know enough about Caldwell. I keep promising myself I'll catch up on him. I know he's good, but I've just not seen much of him. Joe Warren is their co-main. Don't really care about that. And then the Christina Williams, 1-0-0, number 301 pound for pound ranked female in the US Southwest, according to Tapology, is their third fight down on that card. So classic Bellator booking. Here's 2 fights that you could care about. Here's 2 fights you don't give a shit about on TV anyway. And here's a load of dark fights. And then the one that you're probably interested in, if you're actually listening to an MMA show in the middle of the day, is UFC 222. Or 222, or 222. Or 22-2. I trust that you probably don't give a shit about Cyborg versus Kunitskaya. I've been trying to watch some Kunitskaya. She's not bad, but she is also a bantamweight, and not one of the best bantamweights in the world, like a bantamweight who's just coming up from Invicta, and just lost to Tonya Evinger before that. Sean O'Malley looks like fun. They got him in with a 12-5 guy named Andre Sukmaath. He lost a fight in the UFC. He went to sign a fight with CES, and they cancelled that fight because he was going back to the UFC to lose to Alejandro Perez. But he just won a fight against Lee Sanders. Cool. And he seems to be wearing Bodog fight gloves in his profile picture. Don't really know much about him, but people are talking about Sean O'Malley, so I'll be giving that a watch. Stefan Struve versus Andrei Arlovski. Do you know what? I think this might be an easy knockout for Arlovski. I know, weird, eh? But Struve just is so bad on the feet. Every inch of that height and reach is a disadvantage if you don't know how to use it, and he doesn't know how to use it. All Arlovski has to do is crowd him and try and throw the right hand and not get kicked in the face while he does it. Arlovski has traditionally been very good at defending takedowns. Stefan Struve doesn't really go for them. He's got a great ground game, especially for a man of his size. You would think he'd be looking for takedowns. If he could get decent with a snap down off the fence or something like that, just from the single underhook, anything like what Ortega is doing, like baiting guys to throw their hips back and put their head forward, or Tony Ferguson and be a bit more proactive, snapping dudes down. He could be a beast. He's got a great Darce choke. He's got really long arms. He's taller than everyone he fights. The guillotine and the Darce choke and all that stuff should be like stuff he can win fights with consistently. But he just doesn't really use any of the clinch work. He doesn't dig in the knees or anything useful. He just stands on the outside kicking and then getting hit. Kat Zingano's back. Yeah, love that girl. She's fighting Ketlin Vieira, who's undefeated. Man, that's a tough fight to jump straight back into, especially coming off a pair of losses, but also not having fought in forever. Yeah, so she fought once in 2015, once in 2016, and now we're into 2018. God, man, her stuff has been rough. I mean, I've always been a Kat Zingano fan, mainly because, I just love watching her knee people. But, it's hard not to want to see her win, or at least do well, with the stuff she's had going on in her life. I still think she could have been a nightmare for Ronda Rousey if she hadn't just run at her, which was just the strangest fight in the world. Mackenzie Dern is making her debut. Always a big fan of Dern. Always a big fan of Dern's accent. If you've never seen that video, she used to be like standard SoCal gal and a Valley girl, gagging me with a spoon. But she went to Brazil to train and picked up more and more of the Portuguese accent. I mean, her dad's Megaton, so she is like properly Brazilian, but just hilarious. And of course, the girl got an ass like I've never seen. To quote Prince, R.I.P. Yeah, no, people like that about her. Her weigh-ins are always big hits on the YouTube. But also, she's got sick jiu-jitsu. It's interesting watching her adapt, actually, because she used to be known for sort of like the sit-up guard stuff. Similar to, what's her name? Michelle Nicolini in that regard. Very good with the sit-up sweep. Sometimes they call it the koala guard and various other things, but sitting up around that leg and controlling the sleeve on the other side. And that's stuff that doesn't really adapt as well to no-gi. You have to just sit up and come up on the single. But she's done really well in MMA so far. I mean, her striking's still dog crap, but, it can get better. I mean, my example is always Ryan Hall. Like, who would have thought that he'd come out and start karate kicking people in the face? So, if you're a world champion in one thing, you just need to find the right people to train with and really systematize it in the right way and go at it in sort of a way where you're limiting what you have to learn but making it as useful as possible. And you can quite quickly become a lot better. Beneil Dariush versus Alexander Hernandez is an interesting one to me because Alexander Hernandez is saying here on Tabology that he's the number 2 lightweight in Texas. Good job. I'm going to check who's number 1 now, and it's going to be like an actual top 10 ranked. Nope, Charles Cheeks III. Okay then. But Beneil Dariush, obviously, like, very well regarded. I think he's still a top 10 lightweight by most reckonings. So a weird fight, but I'll watch Dariush versus anyone. He's a great fighter. Again, another one of those guys who came in from a jiu-jitsu background, and he was very good with the gi. He, there's some great tutorials online with him and Trumpet Dan, where he's showing his like classical open guard, a collar, sleeve, foot on the bicep, And he had a really good match with Chrome Gracie a few years ago. But yeah, he came over, worked with Rafael Cordero, and if there's one thing Rafael Cordero can do, it's get a one-dimensional grappler confident striking. I mean, he was giving Barbosa nightmares just by running at him over and over again until he got caught with a knee. People only remember the knee, but he had Barbosa looking like a rag in the wind. John Dodson versus Pedro Munoz. Oh yeah, that got moved. I was wondering what happened with that one. I was like, oh, I swear I've seen that before. Yeah, I'm excited for that. Pedro Munoz, king of the guillotine. John Dodson, king of clinging to the victory over TJ Dillashaw because you realise he actually hasn't got that many good wins on his record recently. John Dodson's one of those guys where we're always like, oh wow, he's a real world-class talent. He's the guy. He's the guy to challenge DJ, but he just can't keep it together. Very hit-and-miss fighter. Holy shit, Hector Lombard's back versus CB Dollaway. Okay. Well, you'll all know who I want to win that one. If you've ever seen Hector Lombard on the pads, you'll know why I want him to see that one. He's standing there missing the things that the pad man calls, and then he loses his temper and just starts telling the pad man what to do, and he has him standing still and just holding like it was Ronda Rousey style pad works. You stand still, don't throw anything back at me, don't move, just hold these up so I can throw 1-2s and call myself show weather. And I've seen him do that with 2 different pad dudes on various open workout videos. It's absolutely bizarre. So yeah, he gets on my tits. Mike Pyle versus Zach Otto. That's a good fight. Brian Caraway versus... What is with the bottom end of this card? The bottom end's great, and then the top end is like dog shit. So just don't pay for it. That's the solution. Watch the pre-fight stuff, or the pre-main event, pre-pay-per-view stuff, and then skip the pay-per-view. Because I would not pay for Stefan Struve versus Andrei Arlovski, Sean O'Malley versus Andre Blair, and Chris Cyborg versus Yana Kunitskaya. I mean, Frankie Edgar versus Brian Ortega is good. That's a really good fight that I didn't know I wanted until it was on the table. But I don't know if it's $60 good. Okay, let's talk about that fight anyway. Brian Ortega, I've been watching all his fights, and he is an enigma. He wants to be like an old school boxing cutie. He's jabbing and trying to go into the shoulder roll. But if you press in on him when he goes into the shoulder roll, you can hit him square in the head with right hands, like multiple. Moicano did it at several points. And the one thing that the shoulder roll is supposed to do is protect you from the right hand. The left hook's supposed to be the problem because he's supposed to try and catch it on your glove, which is obviously incredibly hard in MMA. But he's doing the shoulder roll and it's just not there. Like the guy can punch him in the neck because his shoulder's so far from his neck. But he's got such a great chin on him, and his jab is actually good. Like, he jabbed up Moicano, even though he was getting hit like 3 times every time he jabbed. But he's one of these guys, and it's this thing where they go, oh, he wants you to take him down. And every time someone says that, with the exception of Verdum, which is more to do with the standard of the heavyweight division, every time someone says he wants you to take him down, I just picture them getting pushed against the fence and smushed. If you are like one of those guys who's so aggressive off your back, you don't care about standing up, you are built to lose decisions to guys who are a lot more savvy than you. Like, the thing that I will say about Ortega is that where Yair Rodriguez, I had never seen him attempt to stand up in his fights. He just attacked. And that's what Frankie Edgar took advantage of. Frankie Edgar, if you watch him take someone down, like I think he did against Jeremy Stevens, but anyone who can wrestle, if he takes them down, he moves them the hell away from the fence. He'll turn them right back into the middle of the ring. Cage, whatever. Against Yair Rodriguez, who just throws up crazy shit all day, he immediately smushed him into the fence. He didn't care because he knew that Yair Rodriguez wasn't going to wall walk. And Yair Rodriguez hubris? No. Ego, whatever, got him really badly hurt in that fight because he was just like, oh, I'll just keep throwing shit up. And Frankie Edgar was stacking his hips over his head, standing with his forehead on the fence so that he couldn't do any like overhead sweeps or anything like that, and just smashing him in the head. Brian Ortega, when he fought Tavares, he used his guard wonderfully throughout that fight. Tavares kept trying to tripod on him and he kept stiff-arming him away and then letting him drop into the elbows, cut up both sides of his face. It was absolutely brilliant. But then when Tavares put him on the fence, he couldn't really attack from his back very well. Fortunately, like 2 minutes later, I think it was, he worked out, cool, I need to stand up. So he stood up along the fence, did the wall walk. My concern is, like, how well is he going to do that against someone of Frankie Edgar's level? But that's the thing with like an attacking guard. You can get way too into it. And I was pleased to see that he wasn't that much into it. A lot of his game seems to be built around like having dudes take him down. I think if Frankie Edgar just stays back and low kicks and combination counterpunches, he should have a field day here. For Ortega, I would love to see him develop something of a kicking game because he is so big at that weight class, and he has that game where he's like really good at picking up guillotines and rolling dudes over off their takedown attempts. I'd love to see him in more of a Luke Rockhold mold, just going after guys and punting them. But he doesn't have a kicking game very, much of, at least yet. I think if Ortega has a real, like, opening, like, glaring weakness, I think it's going to be the counter left hook. Frankie, very good at countering in combinations, obviously put down Mendez with the counter left hook. But I don't know, the reach disparity is so much that I don't know if the left hook is going to be much use to Frankie here. Fascinated to see how this plays out. Obviously, Ortega, we're watching him and we're going, there's so many holes in this guy's game. He's such a rough diamond. But, he's also, like, so durable. It'll be interesting because you can, like, there are so many approaches you can take in the fight game. You could be, like, there's nothing wrong with, say, what Ricky Hatton did. It's just that you are using up your resources so quickly in taking so much damage. And there's nothing to say. The only thing that matters is results. Like, there's nothing to say that you can't just butt heads with the guy. I mean, not literally, but just smash into the guy over and over again. There's nothing to say that that is better for the purpose of winning than what Floyd Mayweather does, which is, mitigate all the dangers and stay safe, or Giorgio Petrosian or someone like that. The only things that matter are the wins and losses, but some careers are not, like, the straight in your face getting hit a lot style does not lend itself to a long career. And that's what I worry about with Brian Ortega. I don't know if he's working with good enough coaches who can stress to him, look, we found out you have a great chin, but ideally we wouldn't know that right now. That's something you want to find out deep in a title fight or something like that. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to that fight. Is it worth $60? I don't know. I mean, I always wonder about this. Like, I'm always thinking, I have to watch these for work. How much of the base buy rate is just dudes covering this sport? But yeah, I mean, it looks like it'll be fun, and I will tell you what I thought of it on either Sunday night or Monday. I'm your boy Jack Slack. I'm sorry I've been away for so long. Patreon lecture going up probably Sunday, and that'll be the second half of the Pride 2005 Grand Prix. Get to talk about soccer kicks and stomps at length, thank God. I've been watching so much like up kicking footage. I really miss it. So if you want to become a Patreon boy, sign up there. If you want to get Notorious, the book, go for that. If you want to keep up with all my articles and stuff, the fightprimer.com is constantly being updated with what I'm doing and episodes of the podcast and articles wherever I'm doing them. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgoneby@gmail.com. Also, if you sent me an email this week asking if I was all right, thanks. That was really sweet. Quite a few of you did it. I disappeared on holiday, and now I'm back to work overtime. Anyway, God bless and cheers.